Hey everyone, so we're going to sort of wrap up a few loose ends this week. The primary thing that we're going to be looking at is we're going to start by following up on last week's lesson where we created these buttons that let us have have our content respond to user action by doing a year sub selection. We matched this up with our Google Fusion table. And now what we want to do is we want to make sure that this is something that, that the user can share effectively. So what that means is that we want to make it, we need to create some functionality whereby when a button is clicked, it actually appends some information to the URL that indicates what year is showing, so that if somebody emails that link, for example, and then the person on the other end clicks on it, it will show the appropriate data view when they arrive at the page. And the way that we're going to do this is we're going to use a library called History.js. This was one that I found that seemed to be kind of the best updated and was compatible with the version of jQuery that we're using. So that's something that happens, obviously we know when we update our code, things change. Well, the same thing happens with libraries like jQuery. And so sometimes folks may have written libraries like this one, which helps maintain and change the state of the URL bar of what's in the URL. And if something changes in the functionality of jQuery, whether it's up to date or not, makes a difference. And so this is the one that we're going to use. You'll have the link to this, of course, but I'm actually just going to go right down in here, and this one has been specifically designed. I'm using the uncompressed version, mostly because I wanted to be able to look at the code when I was first doing this. So you can see that there's a version here that's designed for jQuery, and I'm going to actually create this by simply copying and pasting the code into a local file. So there isn't a hosted version of this, which is fine. It means that we'll just upload it to, you'll just upload it to your server as you would one of your own files. Usually things are hosted pretty much at the point that they become so useful and popular that lots of people are using them, and then oftentimes somebody like Google will come along and say, sure, we're going to host this, because it makes it better for everybody. So I am going to save this with the file name that they used. I actually have a version here, which is called jQuery.history.8. Yes, I will. jQuery.history.js. I'm of course going to need to add this to my index page in my head tag, and jQuery history. And so I'll just put in the name here, and it just has a local path, so jQuery.history. And then I'm going to look at the README here. So documentation, as you all know, comes in many different sort of forms and formats. I chose the HTML4 plus HTML5 version because it has, it's more compatible with more browsers, right? So that's also an issue, is what browsers is something compatible with. And so fortunately, they have some nice, just like really quick example stuff in here of how to get this to happen, how to use this. So there's 3 elements to this, and it's showing you here how this would look in different browsers. So it does a different thing in an HTML4 browser, but it still works. And then the other thing is that in the documentation, does it say it here? Is actually going to change this second parameter. Is actually the title of the page, the title of the value of the title tag on the page. So now that I have the script in there, the question is, where do I want this to go? Well, ultimately I want this to update when something gets loaded on the page. So I'm going to put it in my click event handler. And I'm just going to leave this dummy content in here for now, just to make sure that it works properly. And then we'll sort of worry about how to customize it for our actual application, right? Because right now I can do whatever I want to the URL and nothing's going to change because I haven't actually set up any code to interpret that URL. So I could append anything I like to the end of it, and it's not going to hurt what I already have working. But the point is that this is, I want the URL to update when the button is clicked. Show new data, in my case, is my click event handler. And so that's a good place for me to put this code. So if I come back here, what I should hopefully see, and this should happen immediately because of course we're actually triggering the initial data load with a click event. And you can see actually that the title tag up here has changed to state 1, which was that text that we passed it. And if I scroll over here, I can see that it has this value of state equals 1. So obviously that's not really what we want to do. We want to be doing we want to have it update with the year. And so I'm going to choose the name of my parameter to be year. And of course, handily, I already have a variable that has the year, that already contains the year. And so I'm just going to update these values to have the year. And now here I have an interesting thing. I could just make this the year. I could hard code this in. I could just, I'll probably just say something like, you know, unemployment data from unemployment data, I don't know, unemployment data. Brain's moving a little slowly tonight. Okay, so yeah, just to come back here and check that this worked properly. So now I reload and state. So this is an interesting thing, right? We see that actually, yeah, so it worked just fine. We see unemployment data 1990. I see year equals 1990. I wanted to see if it had, okay, so it's updated completely. So that's great. That's what we need. So now we are recording what's happening, but we need to make sure that the page will respond to it, right? So I mean, for example, if I click 2000 here, yes, all of this updates, right? But if I load this page again, if I just do a reload, it's not going to default to 2000, right? So even if it has year in there right now as something other than 1990, that's not what it's going to use. So I need to go back to my defaults here and say, and create some code that's going to say, look, you know, check if there's something in the URL. If there is, get the value that you need, and use that to determine which button gets clicked. So again, right now I have 1990 hard-coded here. I want to make that responsive to what the data that's actually in the URL. So the first thing to do, again, I'm going to come back to my documentation here, is it shows us, ooh, yes, here we are, exposed API. So this is a really nice description of all the things that it does, push state, replace state. So the state, when they say state, it means what is at the end of the URL, basically. And then somewhere down here, somewhere there is information, get current index and get state by index. So since we only have one thing that we are that users can add to this, get current index is going to be the this will be an object that says that has everything in it, and we'll use the index to actually pull that data out of there. Sorry, scratch that. We're actually going to use just get state. So get state will return an object. So get the current state of rather the data title and URL. So when the page first loads up, so I'm going to do this after the visualization library has loaded, because I can't click the button until I know that all of the necessary libraries are loaded. So what I'm going to do now is I'm just, for example, going to console log history get state. And then just look at what this return, like just inspect this in the browser so I can see sort of what's happening here when I load this. And if I do that, I will get something like this. So this is the object, and we can see in here there's a data property, shockingly a JSON data property, and it says, you know, year equals 1990. So that's great. The other thing I always want to check for is sort of the null case, right? So you can think about this a little bit like a scientific experiment. You always have to have the control. You want to make sure that you've handled the case where nothing is specified. So if somebody just comes to the main URL, as it stands, then I get this, and I can see that I have an empty object. Okay, so the first thing that I want to do is I'm going to create a variable, URL state, or I'm going to say URL data is going to be history.getState. Actually, I'm just going to be getState.data, right? Because even if there's nothing in there, it's going to give me an empty object. It's not going to give me nothing at all. So I shouldn't get an error on that. So that's that. And now there's something that we never want to, if we haven't, what we want to do is we want to test if the object is empty. So what I'm going to do is actually say if So I'm going to say var default year. Don't make it just default. Is, I could actually just do this, is going to be URL data.year. Okay, and then what I'm going to do is check. And basically what I want to say is, look, it's not, it may seem a little strange because I will originally have set the year to an empty value if this is the case, but it saves me one conditional statement. So basically what I'm going to do is I'm going to say, look, if that URL data object is empty object, this is a jQuery method that tells me whether or not the object is empty. So I'm basically saying, look, if that data object is empty, then I'm actually going to set a default year manually. And then I'm going to say, okay, look, default year is going to be 1990 as it was before. But if there's a value in there, then it should set that year value to be whatever is in that property. So let's take a look at this. So I'm going to check my jQuery. I'm just going to make sure I wrote that right. I just looked this up. I literally just Googled like how to test for an empty object. This empty object. There we go. So yeah, I just looked this up by saying, how do you test for an empty object? You never really want to test for something being undefined. And we can talk about this in class if it's something that interests you guys, but you always want to be testing for an actual thing, not a non-thing, if that makes sense. So here we have, when you see something in the jQuery documentation leading with jQuery, you can actually use the $ in place of it. That's what, as we know, the $ means jQuery. So sometimes it looks a little different in the documentation, but that's what it's doing. So I actually wrote this incorrectly. It should be $ is empty object URL data. So if it's empty, make it 1990. If it's not, leave it as the year value that's in there. And then of course down here, instead of having a hard-coded one in there, I am going to say, make this default year. Okay? So, if all is well, I should see two things happen. So I should be able to load this properly even without a query string on there. And indeed, it does seem that things are still working okay. And now if I click on 1980, so it should be updating here. I should see this in the end. And now if I load this URL into another window, I should look to see that the data is actually loading at 1980. Oops, not quite. What happened there? Oops, debugging time. Okay, so the problem that happened there was that our data object that was coming back didn't actually have, our state object didn't actually have a data value. And so without that, what we need to do is actually manipulate this directly. So I'm using the clean URL property that's in that same object. And all I'm going to do is I'm going to break this string. I'm just going to say, we did this, we've been doing this already. Actually, we did this up in our event handler. I'm going to say URL data, it's going to be URL data split first on my query, on my question mark, right? And then I'm going to take the second piece of that, which should be my queries, which will be my year equals. So I'm going to say console log query string. Let's see what I get with that. Okay, and then I'm just going to take that and I'm going to split the year off the end of that. And so I'm going to say, okay, var default year equals query string split on that equals sign, right? And then I'm just going to say, look, if that's not defined, then I'm, I'm just going to say, look, take that year and make it my default year. So I think I'm going to have to wrap this up in the next video. I'm kind of running out of time here, but come back in a moment and we will be almost done with this.